Arcade games from start to finish have advanced throughout time, mostly because of the hardware in them that has improved due to the requirements of the increasing demands of upcoming games. In 1973, Taito released Astro Race, the first racing game ever. It was played on a machine that stood 162 centimeters tall and weighed 70 kilograms, and played through what was once considered a large 20-inch screen. The game was 2-bit, only having black and white as the colors used. The machine housed a built-in acoustic system that captured the realistic flight sounds of your spaceship. The game, being two-playered, has a score system that was displayed on the upper part of the machine. Being an arcade machine, it required money to work. This specific model only accepted 2 different coin sizes. The game was limited to being black and white, as the hardware in the machine was not advanced enough to support more colours. In 1982, Namco released Pole Position, one of the most popular racing games of all time. This arcade machine was the first one to use 16-bit CPU, making Pole Position the first 16-bit game. This shows the advancements of technology and shows how they were limited previously. The machine had a power consumption of 130 watts and a weight of 170 kilograms. The game was displayed on a 20-inch coloured monitor. It had a 4-channel audio system that captured most sounds in a racing scene, the engine revving, speeding up, slowing down and tyres screeching. This game also had a score system. The top 300 scores will appear on the screen, and the top 6 of those being known as pro drivers. This was limited to 300 as there was little memory to keep all the scores in. The fact that any score was saved expressed the improvement in memory in machines, as it had spare space to save relatively useless information. 1994 brought us Tekken from Namco. The machine this was played on had a 32-bit processor and 2 megabytes of RAM, 512 gigabytes of which were dedicated to sound. The game was played on a low resolution of 640 by 480. This displayed all of the 16.7 million colours that could be displayed. The game was displayed on a 28-inch screen and was both single and multiplayer. The game possessed 8 different playable players, so it had a lot of variation for its time. The fact that it had 8 different playable characters which all had their own unique moves showed the increase in memory size, as much coding was needed to support all these different characters. In 2002, Sega brought out the revolutionary arcade game World Club Champion Football that was interactive with the players. This game was a management simulator where you would manage a football team. This team was decided by out-of-game cards that players could collect. The squad is picked by the player choosing their cards and placing them onto a matted surface so the game can recognise which football player it is. This is then displayed on a 21-inch screen. The machine that played the game had a 32-bit processor and 56 megabytes of RAM. The machine can be set up in 2 rows of 4, making an 8-person LAN football league. The game shows that this arcade machine had a massive improvement in memory, as it needed to know a very large array of footballers and the stats for each of them. In 1977, Atari brought out the 2600. The 2600 had an 8-bit processor, which allowed it to play games with colour rather than just black and white. The colours in the games that were played on the Atari 2600 were limited depending on the television format used. If using an NTCS format, all 128 colours were available, whereas if using a PAL format, only 104 colours were available to display. The 2600 had 128 bytes of RAM, as at the time memory was very expensive, limiting how much they could put in to sell it at a reasonable price. The most played game on the console was Pac-Man, selling around 7 million copies of it. Although it was a simple game, used colours and had different levels showing how advanced it was. Even though it was limited by the memory in the machine, there was little and limited sounds in Pac-Man, meaning the game was limited by the sound card or processor in the system. In 1983, Nintendo brought out the NES, Nintendo Entertainment System. This, similar to the Atari 2600, had an 8-bit processor, but had 2 kilobytes of RAM to give more help sending data faster. This RAM allowed the console to play better quality games that were usually around 400 kilobytes in size. The NES also supported custom controllers that gave a more immersive experience in games. For example, the NES Zapper was shaped like a gun and used light to interact with the on-screen situation. This changed how games were played, as they were more lifelike and realistic, as the player felt that they were wielding a gun. 1995 brought us the first PlayStation console from Sony. The PlayStation had a 32-bit CPU, allowing the games made for this to use a whole 16.7 million different colours to make them as lifelike as possible. The PlayStation had 2 megabytes of RAM, allowing its game to be bigger in size, meaning they were more advanced and complex. The PlayStation introduced memory cards. These were external memory which could be used in the PlayStation. The memory card allows the player to save their game progress to that card. This saves space on the console itself. The controllers in the PlayStation were also improvements from the previous consoles, as they housed a weight that would spin in the controller in relation to on-screen events, simulating movement of the environment. In 2013, Sony brought out the PlayStation 4, a next-gen console. The PlayStation 4 has 2 USB 3 ports, which immediately shows its advancement over any other console, as USB 3s are the new and improved USB ports, allowing for faster data transfer rate. It had 8 GB of RAM, which Sony say will make it have a longer life. The PlayStation has advanced controllers that connect wirelessly rather than wired. They are also improved as they include a touchpad on the top of the controller for a new way to interact with the console. The graphics card and processor are both custom built by Sony themselves, specifically for the PlayStation 4. PlayStation has a rest mode, where the console puts itself in a state of low power to save electricity. In this mode, the console is still able to download or update while consuming very little electricity. In 1989, Nintendo brought out their first handheld gaming device in the form of the Game Boy. The Game Boy featured an 8-bit processor, which helped contribute to the 60 frames per second that it could reach. It had 16 kilobytes of internal RAM, 8 kilobytes of which dedicated to video, which in the form of external devices could be increased to 32 kilobytes. The Game Boy displayed its games on a 2.6-inch built-in screen, which displayed the games at a resolution of 160 by 144. Two Game Boys could be linked together via built-in serial ports to allow two players to play together. The Game Boy limited the realism of their games due to only having 4-bit sound. For example, Tetris was limited by a low-end sound card, meaning it could only use few single tones to signify in-game events. In 1998, the Game Boy's successor, the Game Boy Color, was brought out. This handheld console had a coloured screen with a resolution of 160 by 144 to show its game through, giving those making the games more leeway and means that they don't have to have as many limits to work with when creating the games. However, the Game Boy Color still had little RAM at 32 kilobytes. This limited how complex the games could be. The 8-bit processor allowed for the coloured screen to display 56 colours. The Game Boy Color housed a small mono speaker to portray the in-game sounds to the player, as well as having stereo headphone jack. In 2004, Nintendo brought out the Nintendo DS. The DS consisted of 2 screens, one for displaying the gameplay of the game and one for interaction with the player, as it was touch sensitive. This can be put to use in most games in some way. The resolution of both screens was 265 by 192. This is first of all not needed due to the screen being small. However, it was limited to this, as the screen only has 8-bit depth. The DS has 2 processors, both 32-bit. One of these processes the game mechanics and video rendering, and the other processes any other processes, making the DS carry out actions. As well as this, the DS had 4 megabytes of RAM to help it run games faster. In 2010, Nintendo brought out their new Nintendo 3DS. Similar to the DS, the 3DS had a more advanced hardware and used this to create new, never-before-seen gameplay. Although 3D moving pictures had been seen before, the 3DS used its hardware to produce a 3D image that didn't need glasses to allow the player to see it. The 3DS had 128 megabytes of RAM and 1 gigabyte of storage. It didn't need much storage, as the games played were kept on the card. The 3DS also had a small resolution of 320 by 240. This may have been limited not by the screen, but by the graphics card in the Nintendo 3DS. The 3DS used the same concept as the DS, using 2 processors to split the weight, making it run faster and smoother. The 3DS also had stereo speakers to help give the 3D illusion. In 1983, Apple's first PC was brought out, the Apple II. The Apple II had an 8-bit microprocessor and 64 kilobytes of built-in RAM, which could be extended to 1 megabyte or more, helping the computer run its programs and processes faster. The Apple II had different video settings that could change and improve for resolution. These modes can change the resolution from 48 by 48 all the way up to 560 by 192, each stage apart from one having a range of 15 different colours. It had a 1-bit toggling speaker that would have played one tone by having an on or off status. It had 7 bus slots that were used to upgrade parts of the PC, such as its RAM, as 64 kilobytes was not enough, limiting what the computer could do. The Apple II had a joystick that could be used as an external controller for some games. 1985 brought us the Commodore 64. This ran on a 6-bit microprocessor. The Commodore had full use of the 16 colours it could handle. It used a small resolution of 320 by 200. It had 3-channel audio so that it could give a 3D audio image when playing games. The sounds used all 4 different types of waveforms, creating many different sounds, and also featured a programmable filter that could filter out high and low pitched sounds and more. The Commodore has 64 kilobytes of RAM, however 38 kilobytes of this is only used for basic programs. 1992 brought us the Amiga 1200 PC, which had a processor rather than a microprocessor. It also had 2 megabytes of RAM in the form of an Amiga chip. However, this could be upgraded to 8 megabytes without upgrading the processor. But when the processor had been upgraded, the RAM can then be upgraded to 256 megabytes, allowing the computer to run programs much quicker and efficient. It had a 24-bit color pattern containing 16.8 million colors and used a resolution of 800 by 600 pixels. It had 2 stereo channels for its audio, making the sound quality and position much more realistic. It allowed for a 3.5-inch floppy disk to be used as external storage. A modern PC is one that overweighs all specs from previous PCs. For example, the T-Rex made by Dino PC has some of the best hardware around. It holds an Intel i7 processor which could be overclocked to 4.6 GHz, making one of the best CPUs run faster. It has 16 GB of DDR4 RAM, DDR4 being faster and more efficient. It has 3 12 GB graphics cards, meaning it can display very high quality graphics at high resolution. The T-Rex also moved from hard drives and now use solid state drives. These are a lot faster at transferring data as there is no moving parts within them. Because there are no moving parts, they are also more durable and can survive drops and knocks. The way in which this is monitored is also improved. For example, fans have not been enough to cool the components in these larger PCs such as the T-Rex. Because of this, the T-Rex has a newly designed water cooling system that sends cooled water around the PC to extract heat from the components.